So this afternoon I'm talking about stages of development, and I know that the range here of people who are completely integral theory and know all the details versus those who are here really almost for the first time. So I'm going to, like David, try to balance myself in the middle. If I get too theoretical and you're getting bored, put your hand up, let me know. If I'm getting too simplistic, also let me know that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with a bit of the theory. David covered a fair amount this morning, but we've got new people, so I'm going to start with the basics of the theory, and then we're going to try to do some interactive things this afternoon that can get us to bring the idea of stages into our lives so we can start working with them and see how they can be valuable. So I'm going to figure out all my technology here. The first thing I want to do is talk about the concept of stages, the idea that people as adults grow and change over time. Piaget mapped the stages of children, and everybody is now pretty comfortable with the idea that children start out with a sensory motor and then a concrete view of the world and then gradually get into abstract reasoning, that kind of thing. But it was assumed that when you got to be 21, you were done. That was it. And as anybody who's over 35 or so knows, that's not true. You keep going. And you can look at how you see the world now and see that it's really completely different from the way you saw it maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And that kind of depth and that kind of expansion in your ability to understand life has been mapped. And it's been mapped by many, many, many theorists. And I'm going to probably touch on 30 of them in this talk, all of whom have come to relatively similar conclusions. They measure somewhat different things. They measure different types of people and things like that. But there seems to be a very generally understood sequence of stages through which we move as adults. So knowing what those are can be very helpful in terms of understanding ourselves and understanding other people. If we're interested in personal growth, it's very helpful in terms of knowing what's my next step, what do I need to do, how do I grow. So I want to talk about a little bit about that at the end of the talk, about how is it that in fact we can transform. What are the practices that help us to transform? So historically, this is before Wilber started writing, there were people who were doing various things in development. I'm going to run through each one of them quickly here. The first one was James Mark Baldwin, whom probably nobody has heard of, but was a really seminal influence on Wilber. And he was really an amazing person. He wrote about psychology, psychiatry, and evolution. He was reading Darwin, and he brought the idea of evolution into psychology, this whole idea of growth and change. And he built a meta-theory of psychology. So he's really very significant, a very brilliant person, and he affected Piaget and Wilber. And his basic, the Baldwinian evolution idea, was that culture shapes humans as much or more than natural selection. So he brought that aspect of it in. And there's this phrase, ontology recapitulates phylogeny, which people kept saying, and I kept thinking, oh my God, what does that mean? I had to look it up like 5 times. I could never get it. And finally, I think I have, enough of a nugget, which means that each stage that we go through in our growth, personal growth, is the same as the whole human race has gone through since the beginning of time. So we recapitulate within ourselves this incredible global movement of human history. Which I think is actually kind of neat. So after him, Jean Piaget studied children. He was a genetic epistemologist and a structuralist. He believed that humans generated knowledge and meaning through sequential development. And here the word sequential is important. Through various cognitive abilities like recognizing, recalling, analyzing. And he also made popular the terms adaptation and accommodation. Adaptation means that you figure out the world based on the way you think about the world. You go out and you try to make sense of it. Accommodation means you change your mental structure. You change the way you think, how you think about things. You don't just change what you think or what you know, but you change how you think about them. And then we have, he had 4 stages. For children, the sensory motor stage, very much in terms of movement. That's how children deal with things. Then the pre-operational stage, they have sort of not logical thinking. They'll say all kinds of things like, oh, Mommy, look, the rainbow is on the ground, or something like that when they see a puddle. Then to concrete operational, which means they can understand physical, concrete things. And they can move them around, and they can understand their relation to each other. But it's not until they get to be about 11 to 16 that they have abstract thought. They can take an idea of something, and they can start thinking about an idea. Now, these stages come online in these ages, but we know a lot of adults who actually don't use much formal operational thinking. So just because you have the ability, the mental ability to use them at this age doesn't mean you necessarily do. And there's a group of people, if you're very much into integral theory, you might have listened to Zach Stein or heard about Kurt Fischer or people like that. They are sort of in the Piagetian line of thought. Then we have John Gebser, who David talked about this morning. And he talked about the evolution of human history and the structures of human consciousness that developed. Wilber ended up using the terms from Gebser. There are terms, all of these people have their own terms. They have their own way of dividing up these stages. But Wilber used the terms of Gebser, and they'll be on the next stage. But Gebser didn't go into the higher, more mystically oriented stages. So after integral, Wilber substituted his own terms. Or actually, I think he got them from Aurobindo. So Gebser's structures of consciousness, and these are important because they show up in Wilber all the time. So it's worth having some idea what they mean. The archaic is a very kind of diffuse stage. It's pre-conscious. It's the essence underlying consciousness. It's the idea that at the dawn of human history, people were sort of living in a dreamlike state. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but that's Gebser's picture of it. After that, people began to develop what they called a magic view of the world. So they would do a rain dance to bring rain. They had a sense that they could, by doing something, operate on natural forces. The symbols that they might have had, or the statues might have had, weren't just representations of something. They were actually the earth god. So if you have a little earth figurine, that is the earth god. It is, and it is the earth. It is not just a representation. At the next layer of understanding is the mythical stage. And this is where people develop the great myths, the great stories about how the world operated. You can think of the Olympians and the gods, or you can think of many of the nature myths, those sorts of things. People develop these myths to help them understand how the world works. And to them, that was how the world worked. Their myths were absolutely correct. The next stage is the mental stage, and this is where logic comes online. And this is where people start to look at their myths. As David was talking about this morning, if the myths are sometimes inconsistent, you look at this and you think your rational mind is now being applied to what you were sunk in. You were basically sunk in these beliefs, but now you're getting outside them, and you're looking and you're saying, now wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So the mental, the rational, the scientific starts to come online. Materialism develops. Now you think everything is nothing but a bunch of molecules bouncing around into each other. And then his final stage, Gebser's final stage, was the integral stage. And this came when there was a lot of different, the physics and art and everything was changing, so that there was a new perspective on things. There was a new relationship to space and time. And we got a larger perspective. So the integral in Wilber's terms is much more than this, but that's just a little bit about Gebser. Another person who influenced was Erik Erikson. And Erikson was from a slightly different school of thinking. From Erikson's perspective, things happened at certain ages, and they happen due to the outside influences in your life. That was what primarily influenced you. And as we get into the stage development of integral theory, you'll see that age does not play much of a part in it. The integral theory talks about structures of consciousness, the interior development of consciousness. Erickson talked about the exterior. Now, we obviously don't ignore the environment, but these are Erickson's basic stages, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with them, but they really are very much depend on a life stage. And some of you may have read books by Gail Shee, Passages, that sort of thing. She took her basic understanding from Erickson. And then we talked this morning about Lawrence Kohlberg. Lawrence Kohlberg studied moral development. Now, each of these people is looking at different kinds of things. Erickson was looking at psychological development. Lawrence Kohlberg is looking at moral development. How is it that people make moral decisions and behave in certain ways? So he took ideas from Piaget and from Baldwin. He's a very cognitively oriented theorist. He talks about reasoning. How do people reason about moral problems? And he saw people as taking in more and more perspectives on things the further they grew. So this is his scheme, and he divided it into three parts, into the pre-conventional, the conventional, and the post-conventional. Each of these has two stages under it. In the pre-conventional, you believe that the consequences of what happens to you determines whether or not it was right. Again, David talked about this. If you get caught, must have been wrong. So the idea is obedience and punishment. So all your concerns are, how do I avoid punishment? How do I defer to power? Because obviously that's what matters. And there aren't any other points of view. This stage really sees no other points of view. The second stage, a slightly more advanced stage of this, is the stage of self-interest. This is where people think, what's in it for me? Okay, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Morality is about what I need and what I have to pay to get what I need, whether it's in terms of stroking somebody or paying for it or whatever. They can see that other people have different goals and preferences than they have, but they don't mean anything to them. Doesn't matter. Then we come to the conventional, and this is all about social norms. This is where you get involved with your group. So you want to be thought of as a good boy or a good girl. So you do whatever you need to do within your group to get approved of. So what is right is what is approved of by my group. There's no exterior view of that. So who's in authority really matters. Whose authority you're following really matters. And people's intentions matter. Well, if you meant to follow the rules of your church and you fell off, you're still a good person. You just screwed up. The second level of this kind of thinking is thinking in a more society-wide perspective. Okay, in order to have a society that works, we have to have law and order. So we've all got to follow the rules. So I have a duty. This is where duty comes online heavily. I have a duty to follow the laws and the rules of my society because I want a functioning society. So at this point, guilt starts to come on. Yes?
Well, it seems like the law and order piece down there relies on the obedience and punishment piece from the pre-conventional to actually try to, its mechanism for enforcing that.
Yes, and repeat the question. Yes, he said that this law and order seemed to rely on the obedience and punishment. And I think that's a really good point, and it brings up the transcend and include. With each of these stages, you have already incorporated the previous one. So in every action that you might do, in the back of your mind is, could I get in trouble for this? Could something go wrong badly if I do this? So you build. Each one of these stages builds on the way before. So yes, this one actually does incorporate that, and it also incorporates self-interest because I want a functioning society, and it incorporates social norms. What are the norms? Society has come up with these norms. And, then we come down to this idea of duty. So yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah?
Would you say conventional is more like realizing you're a part of something bigger than yourself?
Yes.
That it's not just, I'm afraid I'll get caught. It's that I'm part of a society where if I want it to function properly, I have to behave by the rules, not just so that I don't get caught, but so that I live in a peaceful society.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it's still self-interested, but it's interested in the group that you're a part of, whether that's your church or whether that's your nation. Yes, you become a part of that group, and that group matters to you, and you have an allegiance to that, and it is larger than just yourself. Yeah, thank you. Now, the post-conventional, of which there are, in terms of what's being measured, very few people, deal with the idea that there are individuals separate from society. Now, this is where individuals are now stepping back, looking at the norms of their society, and making decisions for themselves about how good those rules are. So all of these protest movements, for instance, that have arisen with regard to women's rights and civil rights and all those kinds of things, are all coming from people at this stage. They're looking, okay, we have these certain norms in place, but are they good ones? And people have made the individual decision to say no. So at the social contract stage, this is where the ideals of democratic government come online, that there's an idea of a social contract, that I contract with my government and my government contracts with me. And if my government is not, is a totalitarian one, for example, I have the right to judge that, and I have the right to amend that contract to make it different. The stage before, people just accepted these are the norms, my job is to go along or not. But here it's like, wait a minute, I can interact with this. This is a contract. And then the final one is where people look at the essence of what justice is and the essence of what the ethical principles are. And they make a decision for themselves. So you can think of somebody like a Gandhi or Martin Luther King. There's a woman in Burma, who's been doing a lot. It's those kinds of people who are willing to stand up and say, from the perspective of universal ethical principles, that's how I'm going to act. And how this society is governed and what the contract is doesn't really matter to me. Now, they've incorporated, these are not people who are lawless, and they're not going to go out being selfish. They have incorporated all those stages, but they have even moved beyond to another one. Yeah.
No. But what you're saying about this, the first one that applied, I can't remember the name of the
obedience
theorist,
and punishment.
No, but the one who said it applied to ages. What reminded me is a woman like this, or the young woman who was 13, 14 in Afghanistan who wanted to promote education for women. She was 13, 14 years old, so of course she's not even according to the ages, but she is at this level of realizing that there's something wrong with her society, that the women
Yeah. That's a good point.
Saying that it doesn't matter the age that they can get it. And then we know, 60-year-olds, like you said, who maybe are still operating at the
punishment and obedience. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, it takes time in most cases for people to develop this, so it's rare to find somebody young at that level, but it can happen. Yeah. So Kohlberg even postulated a seventh stage of what he called transcendental morality, in which spiritual truth entered and affected moral reasoning. But he couldn't find any people to measure. So this has really never gone anywhere. One of the things that comes out of these people we've been talking about is the idea of skipping stages or not. And what they have all discovered is, and what they all say, is you cannot skip a stage. You can't jump from obedience and punishment to universal ethical principles. You have to go through each stage yourself. Again, recapitulating essentially what the whole human race has done. We individually go through each one of these stages. So our teenagers, we expect to have conventional reasoning, and they don't. And so we get upset with them. And like, why can't you see? Well, they can't see. They're in a state of self-interest. That's where they are. And somehow knowing this helps us meet people where they are and get some understanding of what they what they think. There's also the idea of reversibility at the higher stages, which is moral musical chairs. In other words, if I decide this for myself, if I were in your shoes, would I also decide that for myself? And that's a really good question to stop and ask yourself, because even if we're functioning at a higher level, we often, to really function all the time at these higher levels requires that kind of thinking, to be able to put yourself in another's shoes and to be able to make a decision that's good for everyone. Universal ethics again. Gilligan, whom David mentioned, Carol Gilligan critiqued Kohlberg, saying that he put an overestimate emphasis on justice, that it was androcentric, he only studied boys. And she said that there was this development of care as well as justice. But at the top, both come together, whether women develop through stages of care. I care for myself. I care for the others around me. I care for all of us. And then men go through the stage of what's right for me, what's right for my group, what's right for everybody. But at the top, according to her, they join. And care and justice, care and responsibility both become important to both sexes. Her work has been seriously criticized, and there hasn't been a lot of research, so she's kind of dropped out of favor recently.
Lynn?
Yes?
Is there somebody that's known for carrying on Kohlberg's work?
Yes, well, Zach Stein and Theo Dawson and people like that have relied a lot on Kohlberg. Kohlberg himself had a very narrow range of work, and most people have taken from him, but they haven't followed him. I don't think there's a lot that's specifically in the moral line after that. I'd have to think about it, and maybe we'll come to somebody, and if I see it, I will. So Abraham Maslow, which many of you may have heard of, he was a much more popular theorist. He was in the field of humanistic psychology. He took a positive view of human nature. Instead of studying what was wrong with us, like Freud had done, he studied what was right with us. And so he looked at self-actualizing people. Who were they? What were their values? What did they live by? What mattered to them? And he believed that the goal of living was to attain personal growth and understanding. So in some sense, he was kind of the father of the personal growth movement as well. And he came up with a hierarchy of needs, starting with the physiological. We need to breathe, we need food, water, sex, sleep. We need safety, we need a roof over our head, we need resources to survive. And the next is love and belonging. We need friendship, we need family. The next one is esteem. We need to have confidence. We need to achieve. We need the respect of other people. And then the self-actualization, where we live by morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, a lack of prejudice, and an acceptance of facts. He actually had two other stages in between those, which don't show up very often, which were for cognitive stimulation and exploration, and for aesthetics, for harmony. He talks about the difference between deficiency needs and sufficiency needs. These are all deficiency needs. We feel a lack in some way, and so we have to fill it with physiological, or safety or love or things like that. We get up here, that's what he calls a sufficiency need. That now we have satisfied all our basic needs, now we can expand, and we cease to be driven by deficiencies. Now, one thing about this that is quite different from the integral stages is that you can go up or down. If you lose if you're in a hurricane, you lose your house, you lose everything, your first thought is not going to be, do I have self-esteem? It's going to be, can I get water today? Is there clean water available to me? So you can go up and down these stages depending on that. And that is not true of the integral structures that we're going to be talking about. Well, if we have time, I might come back to this. It's very interesting. These are the qualities of self-actualizing people, which we'll get into when we get into the higher stages. So in terms of modern developmental theorists, these are people who are working at the same time as Wilber. Wilber started writing, I think, published his first book in 78, did you say, David? Yeah, around there, 73, 78, something like that. all of the people that I'm going to talk about now are actually working in tandem with him, drawing from his ideas, and he's drawing from theirs. The ideas of structure, of evolution, of invariant sequence, you have to keep, can't skip a stage, and building on each other are part of all of these people's work. The idea of pre-conventional development, conventional development, and post-conventional. Pre-conventional being before you start adopting norms of society in your group, and post-conventional when you begin to be able to look at those norms, show up in much of the work. Then we have the idea of developmental lines, and David talked a little bit about this. There are many ways you can develop. You can develop cognitively. Your thinking can get much more complex. You can develop morally. You can be a better and better person, better able to reason from a much broader perspective. You can develop emotionally. You can deal with your shadow self. You can come to be a more serene person, a better presence with others, all that kind of thing. You can develop musical line. You can be a Michael Jordan in basketball, that sort of thing. So all of these people tend to study one line or a group of lines or that sort of thing. So it's all, none of these things are cut in stone. So some people will look at a line of self-sense, at ego, and at cognitive altogether. Some people will be very narrowly focused on something like moral development. Some are focused on life stages, what happens at certain ages, or what happens when I leave home, when I get a job, when I get middle-aged, that kind of thing. And others talk about structures of consciousness, which is what's going on inside my own personal development. They also talk about they have a varying degree of interest in the environmental influence or the genetic inheritance. Some of them are based much more on one or the other. So some of them are domain-specific versus center of gravity. And center of gravity has to do with finding your average place. So here are a whole bunch of lines of development that people can follow. There's the self. How do I see myself? What kind of conception do I have of myself? There's emotional development. How able am I to manage my emotions? What kind of quality and depth of emotion do I have? The relational line, what is my social ability? How do I manage relationally? My moral line, how do I decide moral issues? The spiritual line, how far developed am I in terms of state, consciousness, and understanding? Kinesthetic, physical, sexual, aesthetic, all those kinds of things. Your center of gravity is, if you plot yourself like, I'm this far up here and I'm that far up there, center of gravity sort of is along the middle. And Ken talks about center of gravity, and his theory is really a center of gravity theory. He talks about at this stage. He acknowledges the lines, but most of the writing is about a stage as a center of gravity.
Lynn?
Yes?
Are all of these lines in the upper left?
Um,
I'm looking at kinesthetic and sexuality, not really knowing
They
how
would
to
be-
conceive of that as a line of development.
Well, you're right. That gets into the quadrants, which we didn't really touch on a lot this morning. And since there are people here who weren't here this morning at all, I don't want to go too far into that. But there are many ways in which we can develop. We develop in our interior selves, our psychological, spiritual self. That's the upper left quadrant. We develop in our physical, objective selves. So I would think the kinesthetic line would be upper right. And then we can develop in our we space, in the interaction with others. And that would have to do with our relational self. That would be lower left. And then there's the lower right. And that's as society develops. It develops systems and ways of handling things. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time relating this, but I think that's a reasonable question to ask. So anyway, so some of the people who are domain-specific, the word domain seems to have taken over a lot of the literature, basically a line, but an area of concern. Robert Kegan, I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's a Harvard psychologist, and he works primarily in the cognitive line. He looks at how people think, and I'm going to say a little more about him. James Fowler talks about spirituality, how your faith develops. Martin Yusick talks about relationships using the integral theory, and Robert Augustus Masters has his own kind of developmental relational scheme. Barrett Brown and William Torbert have done a lot of research into leadership, what constitutes a good leader, a developed leader. And then Kurt Fisher, Theo Dawson, and Zach Stein are very involved in education. How do you develop people's cognitive ability? And So I'm going to start with Robert Kegan. Robert Kegan looked at how people make meaning. What do they do? How do they think about things? And he said people have various orders of consciousness, so that our consciousness expands. He said the first consciousness we have is perceptual and impulsive. We just react. The second thing is we start developing needs and preferences. Oh, I like that. I like that. Those sorts of things I like, and they tend to be concrete things. The third stage for him is traditionalism. And that's where we start thinking about, what's my role? What role do I play here? Okay, today, in this situation, I'm a wife. I may be an employee. I may be a manager. I may be part of a team or something like that. So people get concerned about self-consciousness. Who am I? What's my role here? And then there's modernism, where people start to become individuated. They have autonomy. They, again, move out of the group. This would be a post-conventional stage where they start looking at their group, at their roles, and deciding, am I my role, or maybe I'm more than my role. And then postmodernism, this is where you can see competing theories, like, okay, there's socialism and there's capitalism. And you can take a position outside of those two. Instead of being in one of them, you can step back and observe different theories and understand them. He came up with the idea, and the name of one of his books is called In Over Our Heads. And his theory is that most people are above this line, and yet our system requires a modernist perspective. We need to be able, in order to live in this society, to make decisions for ourselves, to craft our own relationships. We're really our own employer. We farm ourselves out to people. Whereas in this stage, we are employed by the company is what counts. In this one, it's me that counts. So we have to be able to craft these things for ourselves. Our society is now demanding it of us, this kind of individuality. Most people can't do it. In fact, Zach Stein was saying something about just picking a phone plan is a really high order of consciousness, because you need to be able to keep that plan in mind and this plan in mind, and all of them have different details and none of them match. And you're like, oh my God, that's like a postmodernist level of thought. So he says most people are in over their heads, and they're frantic, they're struggling, they're drowning. They're trying to figure out society. They can't do it. They're looking for rules. They're looking for somebody to tell them what to do. They're looking for what the society their parents had, which was you got out of school and you went to work for a company. It was quite simple. You got married, you had children. Now you can have 15 different types of relationships. You can work for yourself. You can go for a startup. You can work on the internet. You can work, and deciding all that is a complicated thing. So he says most people are at traditional less, and they're trying to make sense of modern life. He also, another real important concept of Kegan is the idea of having instead of being had by. And he says that what happens is you develop, so for example, when you're at the perceptual impulsive stage, you are had by your physical impulses. You have no control over those. They drive you. But when you get to the next level, you begin to be able to control your physical impulses. Now, instead of being had by your physical impulses, you have them. You're aware of them. I'm hungry. But you don't immediately just grab something. You think, okay, lunch in an hour, I can wait, that kind of thing. Then you get needs and preferences, and you are your needs and preferences at a certain stage. There is nothing, you are them. And you get to the next stage and you say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I do prefer to wear blue, but some days I can, that sort of thing. And then you get to the place where you realize that, well, you get to a place where you are your thinking. Your ideas about things are who you are. And then you can go beyond that and see you are not, in fact, your thoughts. You're something else. You only have thoughts. And as you move into each of these stages, the one before is not you anymore, and it becomes less substantial in a way and less important. It's more easily controlled. It's within your ability to handle. Yeah.
The have instead of had by is sort of, could you apply that to maybe patterns in society? If you look at either like the English or the case system or something, it's like, well, I have to marry into this class. I have to fall in love with somebody that's like this, instead of that you're had by the system instead of. Or would you apply it to
Well, yeah, and that actually would be, for instance, a traditionalist system. Oh. Okay, so you're born into a world where everybody has certain rules about how they marry. You individually can be in that world and adopt it and not even think about it. You can be in a situation where it doesn't even cross your mind to question it.
But to question it is to be in the have.
Yes. Once you start to question it, you're no longer had by that. It's not who you are. It's something you're now observing, either in yourself or in your culture or whatever. Yeah. So anyway, that's an important idea of his that shows up in others. James Fowler had stages of faith. His are age dependent as well, tend to be age and culture dependent. And this is too small. I'll just read through them. The first one is birth to 2 years, 3 to 7. Let's go to the adolescent. The adolescent faith is synthetic conventional. This is where you're bound by religious authority. And if there are conflicts between your beliefs and other beliefs, you ignore them because it's dangerous. I can't get outside of my religion. The individuative reflective faith, this is the stage of angst and struggle. The individual takes personal responsibility for his or her beliefs and feelings. As they are able to reflect on their own beliefs, they're now open to a new complexity of faith. But it's a very difficult stage. Next one is conjunctive faith. This is where they acknowledge paradox and transcendence, the reality behind this adopted structure of symbols and systems. And they then come to a complex understanding of a multidimensional, interdependent truth that cannot be explained by any particular statement. So by this point, there would be no one religious code that would solve the problem as to what faith would be. And then universalizing faith, or what some might call enlightenment, and in which the person would treat anyone with compassion. They would view them as a universal community and treat them with universal principles of love and justice. So you could see some of the Kohlberg moral stages coming through this as well. I'm not going to say a lot about Martin Yusick. He wrote a book about relationships, and he uses the integral framework, and his whole point is you need to find somebody as a partner who is at a relatively similar stage, or you're doomed. So, now other people take issue with that it is quite possible to live with somebody who is not at the same stage as you are and make it work. But his point is that you'll get into arguments because you'll have one way of thinking and they'll have another way of thinking. And the two do not meet. You have a different worldview at a different stage. Robert Augustus Masters also writes about relationships and what he calls mature monogamy. His stages are me-centered. Okay, what are you going to give to me in a relationship? We-centered. Okay, we-centered in a fused way, like it's us against the world. And then there's sort of a mature we-centered space, which is, we work together and within society and that sort of thing. And then there's what he calls a being-centered relationship, in which both people are centered on growth and who they are and how they can best serve one another, how the relationship can serve their growth, and that kind of thing. So anyway, he's interesting, and I won't spend a lot more time. Then Barrett Brown is somebody who, relatively recent, he writes about sustainability and leadership. His question has been, what do leaders and change agents who have access to post-conventional ways of meaning making? These are the very high stages, and those are what he studies, actually do when they design and engage in sustainability initiatives. And he has relied on, with 3 or 4 other theorists who I will talk about, what he calls action logics. Now, these terms are showing up more and more and more. Suzanne Cook-Greuter uses them. William Torbert uses them. Barrett Brown uses them. These people have all studied leadership, and they have looked at how people behave in leadership situations. So, again, we find the stages. You don't find many pre-conventional leaders. Attila the Hun, maybe, but not in modern life. So they're looking at conventional and post-conventional. What? Pablo Escobar. Okay. So the conventional leaders you find are, the first one is the opportunist. He wants to win. He's self-oriented and manipulated, believes that might makes right. So about 5% of our modern leadership is that level. The next level is what's called the diplomat. This is a person who needs to belong, and you can all think about bosses you might have had and how they fit. Avoids overt conflict, follows group norms, enjoys routine work, enforces standards, and helps bring people together. These are people who usually keep a pretty smooth shop operating. About 12%. The next level is called the expert. These people value logic, expertise, and problem solving. They seek rational efficiency. They feel unique. They tend to be perfectionistic, and they improve efficiencies. That's about 38% of modern leadership. The next one is called the achiever. This is somebody who focuses on long-term goals. You can see each of these people is getting a larger perspective on what this work is that we're doing. Focuses on long-term goals, delegates effectively, balances managerial duties and external demands, works on day-to-day improvements, and stresses action and goal achievement. That's about who integrates material, spiritual, and societal transformation. And when we talk about Suzanne Cook-Greuter, we'll talk about these a little more. And then we have Kurt Fischer. Kurt Fischer is interesting because of his learning mechanisms. He talks about how it is that people learn, what causes them to transform from one stage to another. Kurt Fischer's work has been developed by Zach Stein and Theo Dawson in a company called Lectica, in which they are making a great effort to do incredibly rigorous study of learning so that they can change the way schools, the way education is in this country, both for children and for adults. And it's really amazing what they've done, actually. But he calls it dynamic skills theory. They work in domains. They don't work with a center of gravity. They work with individual domains. So they'll measure people's ethical abilities. They'll measure people's cognitive abilities. They have tests you can take, that kind of thing. But the learning mechanism in all cases is the same. Whatever stage you reach, you first focus on the ideas of that new stage. And that's all you see is like, oh my God, I can see this in a new way. Then you start substituting. You can say, oh, well, okay, this is one way to think of it like this, and this is another way. So let's say you've just moved out of the, into the traditional stage. You've moved out of this self-centered, my way and that kind of thing. And you say, okay, I'm going to adopt these rules of authority. It's like, oh my God, look at these rules. I can follow these rules. I can get my house ordered. I can get my life ordered. This is good. And then you like, okay, wait a minute. There's another set of rules over here. They're not quite the same. So maybe I'll jump over and do those. I'll substitute. I can do this group of rules. And then eventually you begin to compound. Oh, okay, I can draw some from there, and I can draw some from there. So you're getting a more and more complex idea of rules and how they work. And then finally you start to coordinate all of these. You find a way to make them all work together. So, you know, you could just read a whole bunch of books on how to organize your closet, and they're all different. And at first you're like, oh, you know, what am I going to do? And eventually you realize, no, wait a minute, I can draw from all of this. I can have a nice closet, and it can be basically my closet, which moves you into the next stage. Now, it's my closet. It's not your rules for the closet. It's my rules for the closet. I have developed this, and I'm drawing from these different things. So now you've moved from this conventional to the post-conventional stage. And I bring all these ideas in because they all start feeding into the structures of consciousness. So now there are some modern people writing, and they tend to be more center of gravity people. Suzanne Cook-Greuter focuses primarily on self-sense and ego development, but she also looks at a wider, if you look at her work, it actually brings in morals and psychology. It brings in a lot of things. Don Beck has been called the person of memes and worldview. Memes are like, somebody want to describe that for me? I'm not a meme.
The little things that we get all over Facebook, right?
No.
It's a cultural unit of transmission that works like a gene in biology. It transmits culturally a practice or an idea or.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, so that's what he works with. Anyway, worldviews primarily, but also he has expanded out. His scheme, which we'll talk about a little later, has been adopted in many, many contexts. He's got colors that he uses that are very useful. So he's a person that really, I think we could say, is a center of gravity stage. Terry O'Fallon is somebody who's I've just begun to read and has been working recently, and she has gone beyond Wilber and cook-greuter and spiral dynamics, and she's got some really fascinating things going on. And she works in tiers, gross, subtle, causal, non-dual, and I'll talk, if I get a chance, I'll talk about that, but I don't want to spend too much. It's kind of specialized.
Lynn, could you help us with non-dual? It's a word often used, and I get very confused by it.
Okay, well, there are ways of seeing the world. There's the gross world, which is the world that we live in our waking state. So we look around and we see trees and other people and that sort of thing. The subtle world is the world that we're in when we're dreaming. It doesn't depend on concrete things. Things happen, they're fluid. The subtle world is also the world of ideas. When we're thinking about abstract ideas, we're thinking about justice. Justice has no place in the world space. We can't say justice is sitting there, but we know it exists. When we've reached a certain level of development, we do. So that's the subtle world. The causal world is when you disidentify with the concrete world and you disidentify with the subtle world. In other words, I am not my thoughts. I am, and a meditator, for example, will be in a causal state. There will be emptiness. There will be the void. There will be, often it's said, this is where everything arises from. It's not what's arisen, thoughts and physical things. It's where it arises from. And the non-dual is where you unite all of this. Your non-dual includes both the void and the existing emerging world. And Jose, you can probably do a better job of this.
Basically, it's what you said. Non-dual is a state of recognition that everything is one. That there's no duality. There's no. For example, one of the best examples is that cold does not exist. What really exists is the absence of heat, and heat is the movement. So there's no two things, there's only one thing, which is movement. And the different degrees of movement in one and other state we see it as non-dual, as dual. But in reality it's a continuum, so it's just one thing.
Okay, so if you have growth, subtle, and causal, you could say that's a trinity. But you're saying non-dual includes non-trinity.
It's gone.
It's all one.
Yeah, it's all one. Yeah, I mean, it's like we have a way to decide this is good and this is bad, and we draw a line down the middle, you know, and we say everything on that side is good and that's bad. But if we move our line over, it changes. And if we take our line away, then we've got the non-dual space. So we love drawing lines. We love drawing lines between my body and the rest of the world and my mind and the rest, you know. And once you stop drawing the lines, that's basically.
Yeah, there's the pre and the post fallacy. So non-dual is where all those things have been integrated back together.
Yeah, you're talking about the pre-trans fallacy, which I will talk about. Yeah, I was going to get into that a little later, but yeah. Okay, now Suzanne Cook-Greuter, one of my favorite people for stage development. I think she's fabulous. She talks about ego development, self-actualization, and self-sense. And she drew from Lovinger, and she also talks about frameworks of meaning making. And she has a test and works with leadership development. She has this sentence completion test that Wilbur has spoken very highly of. It's one of the only ones sophisticated enough to tease out the subtle differences in the very high stages. And we're going to talk about what each of these stages is in a little bit, so I won't stop now. And her theory is called 9 Levels of Increasing Embrace. So she talks about, in a sense, this gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual tier. She starts out with people in the early stages of development are really body-focused. And this, you may see these names again, the impulsive, opportunist, diplomat, expert, achiever, when we talked about leadership. And then we get into the state of mind where, you know, first we conform to ideas and norms, and then we become conscious of these ideas and norms, and then we start to achieve our own view of them. And then the other stages, and I will get into those later, are the higher stages, the vision logic, which is the integral stages. And then the transpersonal, which would be the non-dual, basically.
Question?
Yeah. Yes? This is her scheme. I actually find that a little confusing. I guess she might have started with 2, 3, 4, and then found distinctions between them, and so divided up to, you know, halfway between 3 and 4 and that kind of thing. But all of these people have, some people have 3 stages and some people have 12, and it's just how they divide it up. It's just her numbering system. So they don't mean anything intrinsically. Okay, so Don Beck. Don Beck is the person who came up with, along with Chris Cohen, spiral dynamics, based on Claire Graves, who is a psychologist. And he talks about different core value systems that people have. So here is a map of everything. This is Ken Wilber's map of everything. And we're going to be referring to little pieces of it. So I'm going to go through and kind of explain to you what all the pieces are. So over here, we have, well, let me start over here. Over here we have the lines. I've already shown you a picture of these. And up here we have the quadrants that David talked about this morning a little bit, but we're not going to deal with that. Here we have opportunist, diplomat, expert, achiever, individualist, strategist. That was from the leadership and from Suzanne Cook-Greuter. Over here we have conventional, post-conventional, post-conventional. We have egocentric, ethnocentric, my group, world-centric, the world, cosmocentric, every sentient being, for example, and rational and transrational. These are all different ways that people refer to this development of stages. And colors have been assigned. Now, Wilbur has colors that follow the rainbow. He has chosen these colors. So he starts, well, down here actually starts below that, but Red is the opportunistic, power, me-centered kind of person. Amber is the conventional, following the group, following the norms. Orange is the stage at which you first break out into your own thinking. Green is where you start to develop a sensitivity for the rest of the world. Green, we know it in our culture, just the word green brings forth our idea of what that is. Teal is the strategist, and these are the second-tier stages, and these are the third-tier stages. So we're going to start out talking about these and then move into some of the others. But you could see they all have parallels. These over here are Don Beck's colors. He chose them. Apparently he was just giving a talk at some point and wanted colors that sort of contrasted, so he picked these. They're not exactly Wilbur's, and there's been a lot of confusion because of these two color schemes. Yeah.
Actually, there's an explanation he gave one day. He was in South Africa, and he picked the colors in a way that didn't offend the people of South Africa. So because he had this work going on, he came up with the colors so that they were very neutral and they did not mean anything by themselves.
No ethnic group. It wasn't like...
Because he was in South Africa helping them.
And they were colors inside people, not colors
outside people. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so anyway, so that's his color scheme. And he talks about the first level, which he doesn't have on there, is beige, which we talked about as that sort of pre-existence, the dreamlike state where it's automatic, autistic, reflexive, is driven by deep brain programs, instincts. There's little awareness of the self as a distinct being. You can think of a baby is kind of in this stage. They live off the land like other animals. The second stage is purple, and this is also corresponds to Ken Wilber's purple. This is the clannish one. This is the spirit beings govern the clan. There is allegiance to the elders, which some of us would like to see again. There's a bonding together to find safety. People, they live in a sort of an enchanted world, and they seek harmony with nature. And then the next one is red, and this is called the power gods system. This is the egocentric meme. Now we're getting into some of the ones we've talked about. In a world of haves and have-nots, it's good to be a have. Avoid shame, defend your reputation, and be respected. Gratify impulses and senses immediately. Fight remorselessly and without guilt to break constraints. Don't worry about consequences that may not come. Does this sound like a teenager? So, okay. Then we get into blue, and we can probably see ourselves that we have, come through all of these. Blue, this is the truth force, the purposeful mean. This is finding purpose and meaning in living. This is where you're willing to sacrifice yourself for the deferred reward. In other words, I'll go to work. I understand that I need to go to work to get money so that I can live. I don't have to have it today. I can, pay into a retirement fund, that kind of thing. I understand those kinds of things. Bring order and stability to all things. This is where you start to get a civilized society. You have people who show up for work, who take care of their children. You can count on them. Your world is going to start working. They control impulsivity and they respond to guilt. So, if they've done something one way in the past and they felt guilty, they might change it. They enforce principles of righteous living, and they believe the divine plan assigns people to their places. So in a monarchy, that would be, a monarchy is a perfect example of a blue social system. Then we come to orange, which is the fifth level system. It's just the strive, drive, the words that he gets to it. This is where you strive for autonomy and independence. You seek out the good life and material abundance. You progress through searching out the best solutions. Science and technology is regarded as a great way to enhance living. You play to win. You enjoy competing. You learn through tried and true experience. Then we come to green, the sixth level. This is called the human bond level. This is where you explore the inner beings of self and others. You promote a sense of community and unity. You share society's resources. among everyone. You try to liberate humans from greed and from dogma. You reach decision through consensus, and you refresh spirituality and bring harmony. Those are the concerns of this stage. These are some of them, again, put together so that you can see how they go along with each other. These are Ken Wilber's colors up the left. These are the spiral dynamics colors. This is Kegan's order of consciousness, and cook-greuter and Lovinger's, Gebser's archaic magic, Fowler. So you can see all of these people have defined relatively similar stages, even though they've been in different domains and they have been at different times and they focused on different aspects. So based on all this, it seems pretty clear that there are very recognizable stages and that we can learn something about what they are. And here's a picture of the way our world looks today. And it was done some time ago, so it's probably changed a little bit. But you can see the percentage in the world, and this is useful when you start thinking about political problems. What's going on in the world, and where are people? There are societies that are primarily tribal. There are societies that are warrior-oriented. There's societies that are traditional. There's societies that are modernistic. We're just beginning to see the postmodern societies coming up, perhaps Scandinavia and, evolving in this country to some degree, and then integral. So the United States is at a higher level in general, so there are more people who are at orange and fewer people at blue. And I don't actually have the statistics, but our culture is primarily a blue and orange culture. There are some people at red, there are some people at green. There are very few at purple and very few at integral, but integral is starting to emerge here. So there are competing terms and colors, but I'm hoping that what this does is you don't have to remember all of the different colors and all the different terms, but it gives you a sense of perhaps some of the ideas behind each of these things and how they can be melded into one thing, which is what Wilber did. He read all of these people and he brought them all together into this masterful scheme, which I find incredibly useful. So this is just a picture of the cook-greuter stages and how they relate to spiral dynamics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a little time talking about first-tier skills, and then we're going to do an interactive exercise around them. Then I'll go and we'll talk about some of the second-tier skills. Let's see. So we won't spend much time on this. This is the instinctive self, undifferentiated. Purple, the magical self. And I have a handout that this is what somebody else did, and it's just kind of useful to have in front of you to refer to when I talk about it. It's a guy named Kent By, and he's got a website, and he has all kinds of charts, and he's done a lot of work to try to pull all this stuff together. So I thought, why do I need to redo it? I'll just use this. So these are the things that matter to Red. And we have all at one time in our lives been through this stage in which what counts is heroism and courage, immediate gratification, power, control, freedom, passion, glory, self-expression, risk-taking, might makes might. If you look at a lot of the adventure movies that you see, the car chases, and that's what this is focused on. Somebody told me that the average movie was focused on the 18-year-old boy. And I thought, that's what they care about right there. So that's a Red. Each stage has different characteristics. Each stage has a worldview, how it sees the world. And that worldview is fixed. You probably can't do much about it. You talk to people and you think, oh my God, how can they see the world this way? But they do. When they move to the next stage, that will change. And so will their behavior. Each stage has its benefit. Each stage has brought something new into the world, and it has gifted us all with something individually and societally. But each stage has its limitations. It can only see so much. Yeah?
So are you saying then that a chick flick is more advanced than
No. No. Yes, you think so? No, I think it's still red. If I get this guy, I'm going to have a good life. No, I got it. Yeah, and I am my feelings. I don't have feelings. I am my feelings. The whole world depends on whether I'm happy today or not happy today, or, that sort of thing. So no, I don't think they're any better off. They're less violent, let's put it that way. Cattily violent, emotionally violent, that's true. Spoken from somebody who was once a teenage boy, right? So anyway, each stage has its limitations, and that's something for us all to know. Wherever we are in this scheme, we have limitations to what we can see. We're partial. And there are more things that as we grow and if we really work at developing ourselves, we will see more. The word translation, people talk about transformation and translation. Transformation is moving up a stage. Translation is expanding yourself within that stage. So if you're at the blue stage and you're learning about norms, you can expand that into your family life. You can expand that into your work life. You can study norms. You can get really interested in culture. You can do a lot of things and continue to learn more about norms in general. And that's translation. You're taking your skill now, your level that you understand, and you're expanding into in multiple areas. And as we'll see later, translation is one of the best ways to transform. The more complexity you get at the stage you're in, the more it's going to force you to the next stage. And there's another way to think. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, life is feeling unbelievably complex, I cannot manage it, you're probably on the verge of moving because you get forced into it. You can't cope anymore with where you are. And you have to move upward. And a lot of times, you don't know where you're going. You can't see that answer. And that goes back to Einstein's comment that the problems cannot be solved at the level at which they were created. You got problems. You look around and you think, how do I solve these problems? Well, the answer is transformation. But one of the things to do is don't worry about it. Just keep getting more complex and get more questions, and you'll go. Each stage has healthy aspects to it and unhealthy. So a healthy aspect of Orange, for example, is technology, developing all this fabulous technology for us. An unhealthy aspect is, sort of the impersonality of corporations and the lack of care for the environment. So there are benefits to each of these stages, and there are difficulties. So to go back to the stages, now we come to blue, amber, and Wilber's scheme. This is called the rule-role self, concern about rules and roles, duty, authority, tradition, family values, self-sacrifice for a higher cause and purpose. That's where that comes online, a very valuable thing. Practicality, moral certitude, belonging, stability, doing the right thing, and obedience.
You got the armed forces.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody who's not that color going into the Army or Marines may have a difficult time. Yeah.
And that's why they often send people who are at a red level into the armed forces saying it's going to make a man of you. It's going to, and it does because it's one stage above. Now, that's another interesting point is you can't jump stages. So you can't take somebody who's red and put them into an orange corporation and expect that to make a man of them. It's too much of a leap. But the next level, hey, they can begin to catch that and they can begin to change. And so people who have been blue, who have been in that sort of military, mindset, now it's going to move into orange. And they start thinking about achievement. They think about business acumen. They think about material well-being, organization, and effectiveness. How can we... So they're going to be the leader. I mean, they're going to be the person who emerges as the leader. Okay, organization and effectiveness. How do we use these people well? How do we make things happen? How do we develop knowledge and skill in people? How can I master myself? How can I get some kind of personal mastery so that I can control my own less than desirable activities and things like that? How can, we use reason to decide problems? And this group tends to dislike the stage. We almost always hate the stage we've just left. So orange is really down. You talk to them about God or something like that, and they see it as fundamentalism. I just got out of that. I don't want anything to do with that anymore, thank you. And they don't like green. The next day, they see them as wishy-washy idealists instead of, practical here. They don't, also an interesting point, distinguish between the ego and the higher self. So when they come to decide to do something, they don't know whether their impulse is coming from their ego. Is it coming from my selfish side, my wanting things for me, or is it coming from a higher principle? They have trouble sorting that out.
As an example, the pre-trans fallacy.
Yes, it is, yeah.
But also that distinction itself only appears
Later, you don't even see the difference. Yeah. And they don't see the value of including other perspectives, which is what changes when you get to green.
Orange too, don't they have a problem with they don't see any basis for a moral code?
Yeah, they're a little fed up with moral codes. They've just come through all the moral codes, and they don't. They see, okay, well, let's get practical here. Forget all that, beliefs and shoulds and all that kind of stuff. We don't want to work with those anymore. So let's just get practical, what makes sense, what does the science show, that's what we're going to do. So the green person is interested in harmony, peace, tolerance, human rights, social responsibility, making a difference, sustainability. They have an interest in diversity in other cultures. They also now have an interest in the self. They want to go inside. They have an interest in self-discovery. They can start to see their shadow self and want to do something about it. They have a kind of a heart center. They care. They're sensitive. They are involved in spirituality. They also often have a pre-trans problem. Confuse spirituality with harmony, for example. They dislike hierarchy. They dislike orange. They've just come out of orange and all that efficiency and that cold rationality. They don't like that. They don't want any more of that. They have the ability to passionately involve themselves in a cause and to give themselves up for others, which is also a negative because they will give themselves up for others. They have trouble balancing the two. They often get overwhelmed and despairing. Why don't good ideas and good people prevail? I mean, it's like, what's wrong here? So this tells you sort of the difference between the lower stages and green. They want to shift self-interest to group interest, personal success to caring for the whole, disease to health, human beings to all sentient beings, corporations to collectives, Wall Street to socialism. We see this, I think, all the time. You can see this battle between these ways of thinking. Hierarchy to community, rules to caring, money to sharing, consumption to conservation, exploitation to rescuing, success to justice for all, conservative to liberal, and blue-orange values to green values. So there's a lot of conflict in our society between these things, and those are largely orange-green differences. So the pre-trans fallacy, the pre-trans fallacy comes about confusing purple with turquoise. Purple being a very spirit-oriented, spiritual, it's magical, animistic. It's where every tree is alive and every, there are gods for everything, that kind of thing. With turquoise, which is a stage which is also a very spiritually oriented stage, but with all of these understandings as part of it. There's a picture that people do of a meditator and a baby. It says these two people are both sitting. These two are not having the same experience. The meditator, who, assuming he's some sort of yogi or whatever, is at a much higher stage and has the ability to be all of these other things. This person does not. And so green particularly loves to confuse these two. It's like, oh, look, they're so spiritual, and finding like a primitive culture, for example, that may be engaged in some kind of spirit activities. And they tend to mix up the two. Yeah.
I think it's important to define pre-trans as being around modern. So it's confusing pre-modern and postmodern, and not understanding the distinction between the two.
Yes.
Because it isn't modern, but not understanding how to tease out whether it is pre-modern or postmodern.
Yeah, that's a good point. And right. And those who are at the rational orange stage have a big trouble with that because they see spirituality of any kind as being, I left that behind. That's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. That's all this. They don't see the future, and you know, they don't see a higher way to be with something like spirituality. I don't know. Do you want to say any more about that, Anne? No? Okay. All right.
Could you say some more about modern and postmodern? To me, postmodern is architecture.
Oh, it's also literature.
Well, I'll defer to David on that.
Well, postmodern is essentially the green spiral dynamics.
Okay.
You know, and modern is really the orange,
Yeah.
orange view, and arguably blue. Blue you could, but anything red and lower would be pre-modern. But modernity in that sense being like what arose in the Renaissance in Europe about 1600.
Okay.
That's modernity.
Okay.
Pre-modern is earlier, and postmodern begins with you know, the age of Aquarius type consciousness.
Yeah. And it's also all over the universities. The universities are all about constructed reality, that sort of thing. And that's postmodern. Okay, so I thought maybe we just do a little exercise here. And I didn't bring any paper. I was thinking, do we have any paper? Well, you could use the back of the paper you give you. Yeah. And I thought it would be a good idea because one of the things that happens with these stages is people love to use it to pinpoint other people. You're lower than I am. So, and we don't see the value. And one of the things about being integral is seeing the value of all stages. So I thought it would be helpful if we look back over our own lives. And when did you learn the lessons of each of these stages? And that's why I'll put up the chart up there, but this little chart will help you maybe just remind you of what those, you know, what kind of specific behaviors or attitudes can you point to in your own life that tell you, oh, okay, I was at red then, and this is what I learned. You know, this is what somehow red gave to me. What did I get in the process of learning that? What did I get when I was blue? So thinking about just these first tier stages now, red, primarily think of red, blue, orange, and green. What, and we can do this as a group or we can take a little time to think and write. Take time to think. All right, why don't you take a few minutes and think to yourself, you know, what lets you know you were in that stage and what did you gain from that stage? What is it?
Back up, something that kind of, again, defines each of those.
Yeah.
Colors.
Colors, yeah. Well, that's your sheet that you've got there too, so.
It's right here, okay.
Yeah, you can look at that, but I can put that up if that's of any help. Is that clear? It's hard to read. The question is look at red, blue, orange, and green, and think about your own life.
Where I was.
Yeah. So I think it's better I have the questions up there. So I want to jump on a little bit because I've got some other questions. This brings up, I think we've talked about the issue of center of gravity and this idea of stick points and blobs. What did we leave behind? Because I think many of us, particularly a lot of green people say, God, I didn't get orange at all. I don't know how to, make a business or handle my finance. Somehow they scoffed at that. Again, it's a stage that people can sometimes be not comfortable in. And particularly if they are surrounded by a green worldview. And there's a difference, again, between the worldview and the structure. You can spout the ideas of a higher stage. So you can be, I think your example of writing about the bunnies, you're actually at red, and you're writing hate mail and all this sort of stuff. But you're spouting a green worldview. So you've adopted the language. You've got the worldview of green, but you're actually not living in this state of harmony and peace. And you want to go kill those people who are hurting the rabbits. So, yeah.
Lynn, I'm thinking of spiral dynamics,
Yeah.
where one color is we, second quadrant, one color is I, first quadrant, and it kind of goes back and forth. And so
I see what you're
feel
saying.
more comfortable in red, orange,
Yeah.
yellow, and I'm kind of uncomfortable with green and blue.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
You see,
The spiral
and I think
goes
other people
like
are
this.
group people,
Yeah.
and they're more comfortable with the group colors.
I think that's right. Every other color in the spiral dynamics system is when you focus on the self, you go sort of internal, or when you're focused outward. So a green is an outward community kind of feeling stage. Blue is an outward, my tribe, my group stage. Orange is I'm going to make it, and power is my power. And yellow, again, becomes a more individualistic stage. So I think you're right, Harry, that people who are more comfortable in a sort of a communitarian group feel are going to be happier in those stages. Probably find it harder to leave them and move to the next one because it's to a kind of an unappealing direction. And also they may go through them quickly or translate them in a way that's somehow comfortable to them when they do go through them. So that's something for us all to learn from, is where are we uncomfortable and what have we missed about the stages that we're uncomfortable with. So this question was about what did you not translate very broadly. We've already been talking about this. And if you hold the worldview of a particular stage, it's very interesting. So you hold a green worldview. How often are your values out of sync with your actions? So that tells you, do I have that structure or am I just holding that worldview? And it's useful to go back, and we won't take the time now because we're running short, to go back and look, where are my stick points? And you can often find it when you're in a situation that gives you a lot of trouble, a lot of uncomfortableness or something like that. That's something that, you may have what Wilbur says, you leave these blobs in the basement, really sort of psychological blobs. And usually when you get to green or something like that, you start getting really interested in that inner exploration, and you start to realize these things are getting in my way. I react to this sort of situation, and it's not helpful, and I don't want to. So going back and saying, where did this come from? Where did I, get this? Can I do something about it? Can the lessons of that prior stage maybe help me understand, what I missed? I've listed here the different names that are given to different stages. But now we're going to the stages after green. The shift from green to yellow, teal, the strategist thing, is a momentous shift. Wilbur talks about what an incredible jump it is, because all of the first tier stages have an opinion. They believe their opinion is correct, and the other stages are wrong. So if you're orange, you believe that solving things from a technology point of view, dealing with and being materially well off, achieving, that sort of thing is the right way to go. And everybody else is wrong. Somehow they're either stupid or they're misinformed or they just haven't had a chance yet to figure it out. But they're wrong, and green thinks the same thing. Green is welcomes harmony, loves everybody, but it doesn't like orange. It doesn't like orange solutions. So getting to the next stage is where you recognize the value of everything. Well, the exercise that we just did, that there is value in every single one of these stages, and that anything you plan to do, it doesn't matter whether it's a sustainability project or a bridge building project, whatever it is, you got to involve everybody because everybody is there. If you've got a company, you've got people at red, blue, green, you've got to use them. And if you're a good business person, you're going to use them well. You're going to figure out, what are this person's skills? What can they do? Maybe this person's got a lot of courage and heroism. They're red. They're difficult to deal with. They're a problem. You can see that sometimes in these sports teams where they're really fabulous on the floor and then they go out and get drunk and hit somebody or, do something. You've got to figure out how to use these people best, how to appeal to what is best in them and bring that out and help them grow. But not too fast. You're not going to get somebody at red to just suddenly jump up and be green. So, patience and understanding. So that's the stage where you begin to see systems, you begin to see the larger picture, you begin to see the evolutionary picture, and become not only a problem solver, but a problem finder, somebody who can understand what the problems are that are giving rise to something, can see the deeper picture, the larger picture. Let's see if I've got any more of... Next stage is the turquoise, called alchemist and cook-greuter and Barrett Brown, sometimes called the magician. And this is the stage where spirit comes back online. And people at this stage sense the energy flows among people. They may feel anger moving through a crowd, or they may sense something emerging, something arising that needs to be welcomed. They tend to be... the self-actualized people of Maslow. They usually have lives that are quite serene. They have good relationships. They have a great cognitive ability for complexity and understanding. People don't, for example, tend to read Wilbur until they get, to green or yellow because of the level of complexity. I think I have somewhere in here some more characteristics of this, which I will try to jump to. Yes, okay. This is also called a construct aware. This is where people see wholes, see things in totality, not in pieces. They tend to see themselves, they don't not only see the value of the spiral, they are the spiral. They see it within themselves. They tend to live in the present. Their stories are very fluid. Most of us, for instance, come up with stories as to what happened. This is how it happened. This is what it meant. This is what these people were doing. Stories are fluid. It's like, well, it could be looked at that way, or it could be looked at that way, or maybe it wasn't that, or there's a lot missing. They have meditative thinking. They can easily distinguish between the ego and the self. Where is my impulse coming from? There's not much question. They know. They tend to know things by knowing rather than by figuring them out or that sort of thing. They see themselves as a conduit rather than trying to actualize the self. The yellow wants to be the best they can be. They want to actualize themselves. But turquoise sees themselves not so much as an individual actor, but as someone through whom things come. They tend to be at peace, even in the middle of chaos. And they tend to see the beauty in things just as they are. Yellow wants to change them. Yellow sees the problems, wants to put a new system in place, and that sort of thing. Turquoise is more likely to see the beauty just as it is and see the beauty in people just as they are. Now, the next stage, coral, is a stage that has been proposed by the spiral dynamics people. I don't think they've done much with it. It's indigo in Ken Wilber's terms. It's unitive and ironist in Suzanne Cook-Greuter. And at this stage, the person is no longer identified with the mind, but with the witness. We talked about the state. They no longer are their thoughts. They are perceiving the world from a place other than thought. The past and the future. Now, for the turquoise, the past disappears. There really isn't much of a past existing. For this stage, the past and the future disappear into a spacious present. They're not concerned with either past or future, except that they live it all. They have a cosmic perspective, the sense of I am that being, everything. Everything is self-arising. They rest comfortably in uncertainty and kind of wonder into the moment, each moment, what is coming, what is being. They lead by being. Rather than trying to impose themselves and make things happen. And their personal needs tend to be fairly simple. Yeah.
Well, if they haven't, so they found people that that stage?
Yes.
I mean, how do they know what these characteristics are? You kind of
Well,
like somebody who's in that stage to talk to, I think. But
well, Suzanne Cook-Greuter is the one who's done the most work in this, along with Barrett Brown. And her sentence completion test has produced some people at these stages. And I think she has done some research with them, so there aren't very many. I mean, there aren't very many people here. So, Ken Wilber would be somebody who's actually gone beyond this one. So, yeah.
I'm struggling with how someone in that group would read at all. Because it seems like it would just frustrate people in lower tiers.
Well, and in some ways, the leadership becomes a different thing. In the way that leadership at Green becomes servant leadership, leadership at this stage becomes not necessarily being on top. Yeah, inspirational. It's a way of challenging assumptions in a gentle way. Often, I think you don't even know these people are here. They act in a way that it doesn't. It's not like they're the leader of the.
put them in charge of the project.
You could, but they would. Well, yellow, for example. If you put somebody in charge of a project, they may lead part of the time, but they may not lead part of the time. They will see leadership as a flex flow thing. A person at turquoise sees leadership as engaging with a deeper understanding of what's going on, these deeper energy flows. A person at coral becomes all these things. And so they are, it's like they say about the advanced yogis, they just have to think something and it is. It's because who they are becomes whatever is. Yeah.
I would say like Gandhi is a world leader, although he wouldn't call.
He didn't have to do it from winning the top.
Or Jesus has a lot of followers that he didn't have to organize himself.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did it by raising questions and asking people to think and telling stories or whatever. But it was a very subtle but incredibly powerful way of being. So, I mean, there's not a huge amount known, and so that's, I think we don't have a lot of time, but we might want to think about this. Where is my leading edge? Where is my head? And they usually say you can understand one or maybe two stages beyond you. So when it ceases to make sense, back up one or two. And that's probably where your leading edge is. That's what, you can grasp that and just a little bit beyond it. And you might also look at the stage the limitations of the stage that you just left, and you can get sometimes a sense of, you're trying to figure out where you are, a sense of where you are by what annoys you or what you see as limiting and that kind of thing.
I see that the fact that any of us is willing to look at stages and accept that there are stages is already an indication that we are at least agreeing.
Yeah. People other than they don't even acknowledge them. I mean, it's just not part of the consciousness. Yeah. So before you even acknowledge stages, you're up.
Particularly the ability to acknowledge stages that may be beyond what you've grown into.
Yeah, it's like,
that's a pretty rare.
Well, that's second tier in a way, because first tier doesn't want to believe there's anything better than what they've come up with. Like, why would anybody want to do anything other than the way we do it? And so I want to talk just briefly a little bit about what causes transformation, because I think it's helpful for all of us to know that. Wilber stresses the importance of the cognitive line, because being able to take perspectives, he said, if you want to grow, take perspectives, take perspectives, take perspectives. Put yourself into the mind of somebody else. Somebody you hate, maybe. Put yourself into a political ideology that you don't feel comfortable with. Put yourself in a stage that you don't feel comfortable with. How does it feel in that stage? What do people think? How do they see things? Start, if you're in a group of people, start trying to imagine how somebody else feels. And as perspectives grow, the first perspective is how I feel. The second perspective is how you feel. The third perspective is I see those two people over there. The third one is I see that person observing those two. How does that person feel about those two? And then so on. You just back up and back up. Keep doing, mental exercises like that. You can start reading complexity. Try to find things that are difficult to understand. I mean, read integral theory, for example. Okay. So a cognitive line is really, really important because you can't do moral reasoning without cognitive ability, and you can't see your own shadow without cognitive. So that's the first thing that you need that. So complexity, critical thinking. The Dalai Lama was once asked, "What is the most important thing in this world?" And people thought he would say love, and he said critical thinking. There are too many people who are just swayed by emotion, swayed by ideology, but to really think about something, what's going on. So after that, then the second thing Ken Wilber talks about, meditation. That has been shown to move people faster than anything through the stages. That people, normally he says it takes at least 5 years to move through a stage, and that's if you're trying. If you're not trying, you'll stay there all your life. But meditation has moved people through in a couple of years. They have some evidence of that. So meditation, Jose teaches meditation. I should give you a little plug. And then translation. Keep the stage you're in, just keep expanding it. By God, try it out in all kinds of different contexts and see about how you can coordinate things. And if it's getting really, really, really complex, look at, what are the similarities? How can I structure this? Next thing is knowing the map. That's another thing people say is really important. If you know this map, you can get some sense of, I'm acting at this higher stage. This is what it feels like. I can try to do a little bit more of this if I want to. And then shadow work. If you can't deal with your own insides, if they're driving you and you've got problems, get a therapist or do some self-reflection or do whatever you need to do, but dig out that stuff, yeah.
One thing that occurred to me is that if you're at, pick a level, and you pick a therapist that's like a level below you. You're doomed.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole book that Ken wrote on that, Integral Psychology. And he talks about different levels of therapy at different... Yes, exactly. Or if you get somebody who's too far above, it's not going to work either. So, yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then cultivating spiritual attitudes and values. That's another thing that tends to help people transform. And Roger Walsh says that as here. He says that to grow, you need a moderate lifestyle, relationships with the wise, so that the people you're surrounded, here we are. Intellectual study, memorization, reflection, and dialogue, self-investigation, back to the shadow, purification of the personality, and cultivation of virtues. In other words, living a good life and developing those higher values, and contemplative practice. And Barrett Brown has a whole long list. It's in the magazine Cosmos. Immerse yourself in complex environments, explore inner states. I'm just going to jump around. Hold a strong desire. Have an intention to grow. Be open and willing to construct a new frame of reference when difficulties arise. And cultivate a liberal personality that seeks novelty, is experimental, questions the status quo, and explores the unconventional. So, a lot of ideas, yeah.
A few slides back, it looked like those kind of reflected the lines. My question is, if we are lagging in one of the lines, then can that cause like a drag on our overall level?
Yeah. Going up in one doesn't raise all boats, but I think the main ones that the people deal with are the cognitive line, the emotional, psychological lines. If those are in disarray, I think it does affect the rest. You don't have to be musical. Certainly deep musical understanding. But deep musical understanding, people go into a very deep understanding of music, can expand into other lines, can have, and the same with, the kinesthetic line, but they aren't as crucial as the cognitive and the shadow. Those are and moral development. Those three are probably, yes. Time. Oh, okay, yes, all right. Well, sorry I couldn't quite finish everyone, but
I actually have a request on that very subject. I'd love to spend
Well,
the next session and because hearing from everybody really makes it actual.
yeah, yeah. Well, we can do it.
It's really good. We just had to go so fast. But I'd love to come back to it.
We can do that. And also, Jose and I teach a course online, if any of you are interested, that goes into this stuff in even more depth.
Is that what this flyer is?
That is what the flyer is, and it's out there.
This
And
flyer is out on the table. You can learn more about their course.
yeah, so join us. We'd love to have you. So anyway, thank you all. It was fun, and we'll.
Thank you very much.